Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and this week I am joined by my friend, colleague, amazing person, fellow voice note aficionado, Kasey
Literally.
Orvidas. Thank you so much for coming back on for a second time. The last time I looked up the number because I was like, I know we had a great podcast, but I could not remember the number. It is 270 if you guys are interested. So after you hear this one, go back and listen to that one because that was I just remember it being so just well done through and through. You gave amazing content. So this time I wanted to focus it on, and not like we didn't talk about this last time, but this time I really wanted to focus on behavior change for coaches. And of course, anybody who's listening who's not a coach, you're going to find this really useful as well. And really just talk through some of the mistakes that a lot of people are making when it comes to behavior change or teaching behavior change to others. Because I think once we get past that point of, okay, hey, here's what to do, then it becomes, okay, now I know what to do, but like, how do I actually implement it? So before we get into that, give everybody a little quick background on yourself before we dive in.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited. I feel like, it was like probably a little bit over a year ago, right? It was like January of last
It was like
year, I
January,
think.
February, yeah.
Yeah. So pretty much just like, we'll just make this an annual thing.
Yes, perfect.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kasey. Very formally Dr. Kasey Joe Orvidas. I do have a PhD in psychology, and I specifically researched mindset for health behavior change. So looking at how having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset impacts your ability to be consistent with exercise and eating healthy. So at this point today, I'm no longer actively doing research, but I use a lot of the research that I've done as well as a lot of other people in the psychology space to inform the coaching that I'm doing at KJO Coaching. It's my coaching business. And then also through the health mindset coaching certification, which is where I essentially teach other coaches how to leverage the science of mindset and behavior change with their own clients. So you don't have to get a PhD like me. You can just go through my 13-week program instead.
Yes. Which is fantastic. And we will talk about that at the end. And a lot of the stuff that, you go over, we're going to touch on here in the podcast. So super excited for that. And it's one thing, and I know you've obviously been doing this for years now, right? But certainly there's been a huge jumping off point and a much larger public interest in mindset, psychology, behavior change. Even if people maybe don't have the right words for it, I think everyone is starting to understand that that is where the next direction is going. And like we said in the beginning, there's a lot of people who, 10 years ago, the space was really different, right? There was a lot of newness in terms of like, oh my gosh, all this information is new. I'm learning how to do these things. But now, 10 years ago, if I was like, hey, do you track macros? People would be like, oh, never really heard of that. Now, it's so common, right? It's more
Mhm.
common to do it, or it's like more common to find people who, what am I trying to say? A
Like,
lot of
don't
people
know
do
what
it.
it is,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm like,
right.
wait, where is this? Me, y'all know my analogies. Anytime I just start, I just need to just stop and go, nope, no analogies. Just not for me. But basically, TLDR, a lot of people are doing this, but a lot of people are realizing now, whether as an individual, they're like, hey, I have a problem. I want to make a change. Or with coaches, trainers, practitioners, how do I start helping my clients actually embody this? So, where would be one of the first things that you see when people are like, whoa, huge mistake, maybe well intentioned, but first mistake probably of, behavior change?
Yeah, there's a handful of them for sure. And it is usually well intentioned. And that's kind of that's the tricky part is that people think that they're helping. And a lot of times like you are helping and you're still doing great things for your clients, but you don't realize where you're actually hurting more than you're helping when it
Mm.
comes to lasting behavior change. So you're totally right in that like this has become more popular, which is really good for me. There's actually like some Google search trend data that shows like exactly like it was around like 2019, 2020 where things really started to take off as far as like people searching the term like mindset coaching. So for those of you who are listening and you are coaches and you're thinking about, okay, well, that if that's what your clients are looking looking for. You want to be able to stand out in the space and to actually say, I have, legitimate knowledge and training in this area, because unfortunately, the other side of like the mindset coaching world is a lot of just the woo woo, airy fairy, like hashtag positive vibes, just believe in yourself type of mindset coaching. When the reality is there's actually a science and there's an evidence base to all of this, which
Mhm.
is where a lot of this stuff comes in. So I think the like first, like most common, biggest quote unquote, I would call it a misstep, maybe a misstep rather than mistake, is constantly feeling like you just need to tell your clients what to do and you want to provide solutions for them. And often with that comes making assumptions about your client's life that you don't necessarily know. And again, this is coming from a good place because we want to help. It's literally
Mhm.
the foundation of everything that we do as coaches. So, a client comes to you and they're struggling with something, you immediately want to say, here's how to fix it. Here's how you can change it. You're struggling to hit your protein intake. Here's a PDF with like some super high protein snack ideas, right? That's how we want to help our clients. And again, very, very well intentioned. But the problem with that is that that client may think like, oh, okay, she thinks I'm like stupid enough to not Google like high protein snacks. Like I can do that on my own, it can come off almost as condescending if you don't realize it. Maybe you send them like a list of your favorite high protein snacks and it's cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, whey protein, string cheese, I don't know. And they come back and they're like, "Oh, yeah, remember I'm lactose intolerant." And like obviously we all have notes on our clients and things like that. But if you have a full client roster and you're like firing off some emails while you're in the pickup line with your picking up your kids or something like that, and you're just like, oh, let me send them my quick favorites really quick because I can get back to like doing other things. And you don't necessarily have like client notes in front of you, and you're not remembering in that moment that that person's lactose intolerant. And in these cases, it would be so much more beneficial to start with asking a question rather than immediately jumping to solutions and assuming you know what your client needs. Because if you can ask the question, then you can avoid things like, oh, they may come back and say, like, remember, I'm lactose intolerant. So like here's like da 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 da. And you go, oh yeah, yeah, before we get into this, now I remember that. And it can all be revealed by a question. And the question can be as simple as, okay, I noticed that you didn't quite hit your protein last week. Like, any ideas for how we can bring it up this week? Or, hey, I noticed you didn't quite hit your protein, but a lot of your protein was hit by like XYZ thing. Like, do you feel like it's possible to just increase more of that? Or is there something else going on that like I'm not seeing? And like always come from this place of I don't have all the information. The client does. And most of the time, coaches are not operating that way. They're operating from a place of authority and expertise because they're being paid to give their authority and their expertise, right? Like it makes sense, but it is a misstep when it comes to behavior change. The more you can instead kind of like sit on your hands in these situations and instead ask a question and try to gain more information and get more of a backstory and put the client in the driver's seat for like maybe potential solutions before you give it to them, the better you're off you're going to be.
For sure, and I love that because it is a misstep, right? Because it's not necessarily a mistake, because there are definitely times I think that that's valid. When would you see that that could be valid, right? Like, is that maybe when a client's like really new? I often will handle certain situations differently depending on, of course, like what the client is going through, right? Like, let's say that they're someone who's maybe intermediate, but their life is like a shitstorm right now, right? And they're like, I don't have the bandwidth to make any decisions. Can you please just give me a little direction, right? Maybe asking more questions those weeks are not as useful. Or would you say, nope, I
Mhm.
still think that it's better to do that? Like, so is there a time when coaches would maybe use that more or less than others? Because I know, of course, like everyone's going to be working with, there's going to be novice, intermediate, and advanced clients, but then also they could be an advanced client technically in one area, but a novice in another, right? So there's like all these different complexities. So would you say that you would use that differently depending on the client, or just kind of scale it in a different way?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I actually think it's almost the other way. Like if the client is more advanced, then maybe you don't need to ask as many questions because the idea is with these questions, we're cultivating things like autonomy and competence and these like really core, like self-efficacy, things that are really core when it comes to lasting behavior change and actually doing things differently and feeling
Mhm.
good about it and feeling like you're capable of doing it. If you have an advanced client who knows what they're doing. They've been around the block. They've been on their health and fitness journey for a decade. Like you're the sixth coach they've had. Like they know what they're talking about. Then in situations like that, you can probably be a little bit more direct. And you can say, hey, we didn't really hit the protein numbers this week. Like I'm going to send you this protein PDF. You probably don't need it because I know that you're more advanced, but maybe it'll like jog some ideas, get some ideas going for you type of thing. And that person's probably fine with that. Whereas a beginner, if you just say like here's this, now suddenly it kind of can put them in a place of like they're dependent on you for every time they're struggling. They need a PDF from you in order to be successful. Like that's not the goal, right? So instead, like asking them, you could start with sort of like a permission asking type of question. And that could say, you could say something along the lines of, I have some ideas of what could potentially work for you to bring up your protein, but without having more information on what's going on with you, I don't want to make any assumptions. So can you tell me kind of what's going on, like why the numbers weren't hit this last week, and maybe some ideas that you have for solutions before I give you anything. So then you're kind of saying like, I've got the stuff, but like I don't know if it's the right stuff for you. And then it
Yeah.
gives them a chance to come in and say like, oh, this is what I've tried before. Like maybe they just had a really tough week and they ran out of time and they like shit hit the fan. You know, you don't want to just be throwing a PDF at them if they just had like the worst week of their life and they didn't tell you about that yet. So I think that's kind of like based on like advanced versus beginner. I actually think the beginners are the ones who need more of the questions because that's what's pushing them to this place of being more autonomous.
And like you said, they may have been through 1 to 6 coaches before, right? Even new people, and they maybe haven't had a
Mhm.
grasp on it because a lot of people were like, "Oh, let me try this plan, let me try this program, let me do this." And then they are really not learning a lot, right? So then they're still coming to the coach, and then if you are the coach who's still just giving them all the answers, then they're not creating that self-efficacy. And then ultimately what
Mhm.
I find is that when people don't have that, they're just not confident in themselves to make any change, but especially to make long lasting change because they're always
Mhm.
externalizing it to someone or a program or this or that or some type of a plan, anything that's outside of them. When in reality, as coaches, we are trying to cultivate, hey, this is within you. You are
Mhm.
making all the decisions. Like, I am the coach, like, we have this relationship, but we are able to work together. And this is actually all of your doing, right? And that is ultimately how it's going to go. But when you do teach this to coaches, because I know that it's getting more, I think, accepted, but it's still definitely kind of on the fringe, right? How do you like when you get pushback from coaches for this? Like, what are some ways that you can help integrate this? Because I know that there's a lot of people who would say things like, well, I am the expert, right? Because that's why they're hiring me. And to be
Mhm.
fair, I think there's a lot of clients who would say that too. Like, I am hiring you. You are the expert.
Mhm.
Just tell me. So, like, how
Yep.
do we handle that kind of pushback? Because I feel like and again, there are definitely going to be some weeks where you said, like, you could hear from the client and they're like, yeah, it was the worst week ever. Like, I really just, there's nothing else I really need to say. Like, and
Mhm.
those are, of course, isolated incidents. But I would feel like there is definitely going to be a lot of pushback in terms of like, hey, no, the coach is the expert. Why can't I just say what I want? If somebody knew what to do, they wouldn't hire me. Kind of like that kind of a vibe. So,
Right, right. And that is the case. You are the expert on nutrition and fitness and what have you, but you're still not the expert on that client's life. You don't know exactly what their preferences are, what's worked well for them in the past, what hasn't, like what their actual like specific goals are at the core. You don't know what's going on in their life and like what's going to make the most sense given their lifestyle and their schedules and things like that. So you are the expert. You're just not the expert on this other human being, right? And the more you can operate from that place of like, yeah, I have all of the knowledge on nutrition and fitness, but like I don't have all the knowledge on this person. And in order to best help this person, I can't just dole out the knowledge and expect it to land. It needs to be personalized for that person. And how do you personalize something without actually knowing, right? You have to ask questions. You have to get to know that person better. You have to better understand them. And then over time, for sure, if you had a client for a year, maybe longer, you could say, hey, I saw that you're struggling with this specific thing this past week. In the past, we've done this, or I know XYZ about your life and about what works well for you. If that still stands, here's what I think is an option. Like, let me know what you think. So it's still like a collaborative situation
Mhm.
and not just like a prescription or I'm just telling you what to do. And that feels better for everybody anyway, even if you
Mhm.
do know a lot, like making it feel more like they have a say in what's happening is going to make it better for the relationship overall and move them closer to being in that position where they can actually do things themselves.
Mhm. For sure. I think that clients, maybe in the short term, sometimes they can be like a little bit frustrated with it, even on the client end. But then ultimately they're like, okay, no, I totally understand
Yeah.
why we're doing this now. Thank you for giving me, this option, this choice. And sometimes I'll even just present two things like, hey, here's two things that I think could be really viable, right? And that might be like a time frame, that might be an
Hmm.
adjustment. And I like to sometimes just give those two things. Hey, based on XYZ, I think that this could be the best move, but this could also work. How are you feeling about these two things, right? And sometimes just having those options and just knowing what, the potential thing is again cultivating that sense of self-efficacy and ultimately allowing them to feel comfortable in, okay, this is the change that I can make. And one thing that does come up a lot, and this is something that it's actually come up recently a few times, and I was like, oh, this would be perfect to talk on the podcast. So, we often have these large overarching goals, of course, for clients, right? Like kind of like the heavy hitters, but setting small, attainable, all that, those types of goals are really important, especially when the large goals are so far away from what we're doing. A lot of times people will want to set small goals like I don't want to do this, right? So say someone struggles with overeating, which is really common, right? Maybe not even just binge eating, but just, overeating, snacking. Hey, I want to go this many days without doing that. Do you think that that is beneficial to focus on a negative behavior like that, or actually more negative? Because now we're saying, okay, at day 5, okay, like yay, I did it. So now do I do this negative behavior because I've made it these 5 days, right? Because sometimes when we set those small
Mm,
goals, then we can set ourselves up to go, oh, okay, well now I made it, but like let me overeat it now, right? So I was curious what your thoughts are there. And of course there's no one perfect answer, but you know, in the pursuit of having these smaller goals, which can be great. Should we focus on some of those more, I'm going to call them negative things, right? Like countdown type of goals or not?
mhm. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It makes me think of like streaks. Like, my Fitness Pal will track how many days you've tracked, or
Mm.
for instance, like Duolingo, if you're trying to learn
Mhm.
another language, they're huge on streaks, and people will go like nuts trying to maintain a streak of like practicing their Spanish every single day. And it's become this huge thing. And they actually it wasn't necessarily like a research paper, but it was researchers discussing this type of, I guess, motivation using
Mhm.
like this streak type of
Mhm.
option. And it's like very good, right, in the short term, because it makes people really motivated. It's like, okay, I got to do it. Like I can't break my streak. But then if something does happen where you miss a day or so, then
Mhm.
what they see, and this is like the behavior of Duolingo people, is that then they may fall off for months and not get back on,
Mhm.
So it's like, wow, you had a streak of like a year and a half, but then you missed a day and now you haven't touched it in months, because it's like, it
Yep.
really is such a big letdown. And because you cannot make back up that streak, it makes it hard to keep going. And for me, the biggest issue with this is not like maybe looking at it from like a negative context, but the fact that we're talking about extrinsic motivation and not
Mhm.
intrinsic motivation.
Yep.
So you're doing whatever you're doing for the sake of the streak, for the sake of like
Mhm.
getting to a certain day, or doing it for a certain amount of time, and not because it's something that you actually enjoy, not because it's
Mhm.
something that's actually like aligned with your values and who you see yourself as a person. These more what they call like self-determined type of motivators.
Mhm.
And the most self-determined type of motivator is intrinsic motivation. And that is by like at its core, it's just that you're doing it for your own personal satisfaction. It's something that you actually personally enjoy.
Mhm.
And that's where I feel like some of this stuff, like call it gamification, call it a streak, call it whatever, like looking at things and being
Yeah.
motivated by things in this way, that's where I feel like it becomes an issue overall.
Yeah, and it's one of those things because I just use the word negative because, obviously overeating pretty much in any context for the most part is negative, right? But saying, "Hey, I want to go 5 days in a row of reading,"
Hmm.
right? But we'd call that positive, right? So at the end of the, fifth day, okay, if I miss my 10 pages, like life is going to be okay, but if I go 5 days without overeating and then a day 5 hits and then it's like game over, it's a wrap, like that's where we have to also look at the like big picture of these types of
Hmm.
goals. So sometimes I almost get hesitant when clients want to set, like, I want to set small goals, but then I almost want to set more, again using the word positive, some more positive things to say, hey, like, why don't we focus on these behaviors, right? Because you're overeating not because you like to, but because there's another root issue here, right? And that issue could be like as simple as meal timing, or that could be, years and years of mishandling stressors, right? So like two very different things, usually both of those things at the same time. So it's just one of those things that's where coaching has to really be, okay, let's figure out how someone is going to tick. And you would probably say too, right? Like every client is going to be different. So there's definitely people who respond better to certain types of language, right? So how do we handle that too as people in this profession, right? Because there's some people who are like, and we all know, like when you work with someone like who like, yep, I need to be really direct, need to be a little bit more of a hard ass. And then there's sometimes where it's like, hey, I need to be, even for those people, need to be a little bit softer with my language. But then there's some people who just in general, like, no, probably softer language, occasionally be the hard ass coach, right? Like there's kind of like that, everyone has those differences, but how do we kind of find that like middle ground in terms of like, all right, setting goals and having like a different like tone and language with clients too for change specifically.
Hmm. Yeah, and it obviously you're right. Like everyone does require something different, and you can be direct in asking their language preferences in a way
Mhm.
too, because it is true. Like some people are like, just give it to me straight. Like I don't need you to sugarcoat it. And other people are like, I could really use someone who's just like a little bit more of a cheerleader in my life because I
Mhm.
don't have that. Right. So like getting specific with that, and you can ask those questions like on your intake form, and even maybe
Mhm.
give them different options. Like here's like the different types of coach that I could potentially be
Yeah.
for you. Like what feels like it resonates most with you.
Yeah.
And then that could be a really cool, like actual like jumping off conversation to have with them too. And be like, okay, so I saw you circled like both of these. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And like maybe they have a backstory. Maybe they're like, yeah, in my previous relationships, I never like got this type of support. So like I'm hiring out for it. Or someone says, like, I had a really bad coaching experience in the past, and I know for sure this is not what I want. Right. You're like, okay, good. Cause then if I were to give you tough love, you might get like triggered by this like previous experience.
Yes.
So I think doing that is a really great way to go about it. Again, it's just like the more questions you can ask, right? Rather than just like making assumptions of like, or being stuck in a fixed mindset yourself of like, this is how I coach, like it or leave
Mhm.
it. When in the reality is, if you're a good coach, you're going to have to be able to be moldable to different people and different
Mhm.
personalities to what they're actually looking for. And that doesn't mean like go out there and say, I can help anyone, everyone with anything at any time. Like, that's not what I want you to do either, especially from a marketing perspective. Like, if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. But at the same time, like, making sure that you can still be adaptable to the person, like, that's, yeah, extremely important.
For sure. And I love, how you mentioned talking about that from the beginning because I feel like that, and that can change, right? That changes week to week, right? We all, again, using that example, like it could have been the worst week of your life, So on weeks like that, like probably just going to need to be a little bit more supportive no matter what, right? And then there's going to be some weeks where you're like, all right, we've had a few weeks where you're a little bit off. Like, I feel like I can be a little bit stronger with like my voice
Mhm.
this week. And that's where that art of coaching really, really comes in. And
Mhm.
that's just going to take practice. That's going to take time. There's really no way to speed that process up. And depending on how coaches are communicating with their clients, like that's, you're really going to have to be able to pick up on that, right? If you are, using something that's primarily online, you're going to have to get really good at reading what people are saying. And that's especially where those follow-up questions are super important. If you're doing like a call, or if you're face to face with someone, if you're working in person, like as a trainer, like if you're good with people and you notice things, you'll notice immediately within a few minutes, okay, something is off with them, right? Like their body language, their tone, whatever it might be. Online, you don't always have the luxury of that, but honestly, I would say that for the majority of clients that I've worked with, I'm able to pick up on things
Mhm.
pretty quickly just because you can see their trends over time, right? And after a few weeks, if you're paying attention, you'll be able to see like what is someone's normal cadence, how do they normally type, how do they normally express themselves, and sometimes you're lucky as a coach where someone will be like, "Hey, bad week, gonna be pretty short with this." And then you don't really have to worry about it, right? Because you're like, they
Yep.
told me what was going
Mhm.
on. But other times, that's again where the questions come in. And I would say that the longer that I coach, and I'm not sure if you feel like this too, but I feel like it's just the more questions that I ask and the more that I listen. And I just
Mhm.
really find that people just really want to be heard, right? Just like throughout this process, and they might not have that in other areas of their life. And
Mhm.
to be have this like collaborative coaching experience, I think is really what sets quality coaches apart from just another program, right? And that's
Mhm.
not a knock on having just a program, because some individuals need that and want that. Totally fine. If that's the type of service that you want to provide, that's also fine. But there is like just different levels to coaching. And if you want to offer that kind of one-on-one experience, you're going to have to get a lot better with these kinds of things. So what's another we'll call it misstep? Or maybe it's just a whole ass mistake regardless. We can do both. That people are
Just
maybe
go all
well
the
and
way in.
yeah, go all the way in. Like I don't even care. What are some other things that you see that are really common that either come up in the space, or even maybe just some things that come up with HMCC, like with people asking questions, or maybe their preconceived notions with things.
Yeah, I think another big one is, again, just like one people that they probably just coaches don't even realize that they're doing, is really just hyper focusing on the benefits of changing and continuously reminding them like, oh, well, if you are able to do this, then we'll get so much closer to your goals, and then it's going to bleed into all these other areas of your life. And like that's great, but like number one, you're not going to be able to convince anyone to like make a change just by constantly reminding them of the benefits of it. Like they know what the benefits are. That's why they're here, right? So constantly saying like, yes, and then this is going to happen to you, and then you'll have this, and it's going to be so great, and all these things, and they're like, yeah, I know, I know that's the case. And we're so hyper focused on focusing on the benefits that come from changing that coaches are never asking their clients what the benefits are from not changing. And that's like, it's a tricky one because you don't want to put the focus on like what may be perceived as the negative, right? Like asking a client who is wanting to change a behavior, let's say it's like they're eating like fast food too many nights per week, and you've talked about this, and like this is clearly something that like needs to be changed in order to like really amp up the progress towards their health and fitness goals. And if we're constantly like, well, if you don't do this, then you can cook at home and you'll feel so much better and you'll be able to track your macros easier and all these things. It's like those are things that yeah, we can talk about, but like if you're hyper focused on them, you're actually missing the bigger picture as to why they're doing this behavior in the first place. Like there's a reason that they are choosing the fast food option like most nights of the week. And there's a benefit to them for doing that. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. Like we don't typically do things as humans if they don't benefit us. Like we're not usually drawn to doing behaviors that feel bad or like clearly have a really awful outcome, right? There's some sort of benefit to it, even if it's like short-term benefit, like not so long-term benefit. So in those situations, like it would be really helpful to ask this client, like, okay, so I have to understand that the reason you're going through McDonald's half the nights of the week is like for a reason. Like, do you have any idea like what good that's actually like doing for you? And you can say, like, I'm seriously asking, like I'm not trying to be condescending. Like, I really want to better understand like what purpose this serves you. And it's probably things like it's cheap. It's on my way home. Like it allows me to spend more time with my kids so I'm not cooking. I don't want to go home and have to think anymore because I have a really like demanding job. So this is a really easy way for me to not have to make any decisions. And like now you can suddenly like paint this picture of this is why it's so hard for this person to change because
Mhm.
currently the behaviors that they're doing are so habitual and they're serving them in like six different ways. So now it's not just how do we like really try to reinforce the reasons that you should change. It's how do we figure out how to take these things that are currently benefiting you and make sure that they're still happening if you do make this change. Because a lot of times clients don't realize that those benefits could be transferred to this change. Like they're not putting that together. They're just seeing like right now this works well for me for all of these reasons, and so it's making it really hard for them to want to do anything different even if the grass seems greener on the other side as far as like additional benefits go.
For sure. And I think highlighting that is the first step, right? Because, clearly, like you said, even if it is a negative or a not so great or even like a disordered way of handling things, right? We all do things for a certain reason, right? And it's sometimes it's so subconscious. It's like such like this pattern that every Tuesday this is my way home and this is what I do, and sometimes you're not even honestly aware of it. And I mean, how many times have we worked with people and they're like, I don't even know why I'm doing this, it just
Mm-hmm.
happens. And that's so common with food, and because it's become this mechanism that's way, way, way deeper, usually, than just obviously the meal, than just the convenience. And sometimes it simply is that. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we create strategies for this? But then there's also the other thing where it's like, I actually don't even know why I'm doing it right. Like now I thought
Mm-hmm.
about it. What is the benefit to me? Maybe I don't know, actually. And then it's like now we get to do the fun stuff where we're appealing it back. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I think a lot of people want to stop coach, like the coach on the coaching end, they want to stop right there, or they want to give, to your point in the beginning, advice when maybe they shouldn't be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the key part, at least in my opinion, and I want to hear your opinion, where once we've found something that we're like, oh, okay, there's a lot of layers to this, this is when we have to ask more questions. I just honestly like to present kind of like some prompts in terms of like, hey, I would like you to like think on these things this week. Get back to me, next week. No rush. Even if it's longer than that. But this is where we need to start, putting our energy. Start
Mm-hmm.
thinking about this. And then I need you to relay this to me because I don't have the answer. I don't know the answer. I'm not going to pretend to know. And there are some times where clients will share things with me that I'm like, yeah, I kind of had an idea that it was about this, but maybe like 80% of an idea I had this, but sometimes that last 20% is like, I wouldn't have even had this on my radar. Because again, this is your life and your situation. So in
Mm-hmm.
those times where it is something that's more complex, right? What do you recommend for coaches to do? Like was my advice good? I don't know. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's usually what I do because it's like it puts them in that driver position and then it allows them to unfold. And usually we don't find out that answer right away, right? Like, any kind of inner work that you're doing, there's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I found it. And then you're like, oh, wait, there's more. As I literally hit this, that was so dramatic that I literally almost knocked. I was trying to be, what's that guy with the meme where he's like hitting it?
Oh my
That's
God,
what
just
I'm
like throwing things around. That's fine.
He's like, what is happening? No, the guy with y'all know what I'm talking. Again, here's the analogy. Here I go.
Yep,
The
let's
guy, it's the
go.
meme with there's a water and it's spurting out, and then he's putting his hand on it, but it's still going.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Yes,
I know what you're talking about. Yep, that
that
was you.
one.
Okay.
That was me right now that nobody saw because everything got messed up. In any case, what, we know there's literally, okay, there's one layer, I think I got it, and then it's like, oh shit, that was just the beginning. So we can't expect
Mhm.
a client to like, unpack all these years
Right.
of things. Nobody would be expected to do that. No therapist, no psychiatrist, no coach, no clinician, no individual. That this is going to take a long time. But what would be your first steps there once you do, again, find out, oh, okay, this is something that's a lot deeper rooted.
Mhm.
How do we go about making these changes?
Yeah, yeah, I think you're entirely right that it just like it means like asking some more questions, giving them some space to actually think on it, and say like, hey, like I would really in your check-in next week, like please include like some thoughts to these questions type of things. You
Mhm.
can kind of continue the conversation because it probably is something that is going to go on for multiple weeks. It's not just like, wow, I'm suddenly enlightened and everything has changed. Like that's
Yeah.
usually not how it works, unfortunately. Um,
No.
so with that said too, I think that for the most part it should give you like that like alarm bell going off in your head as a coach of like, okay, there's more to unpack here. Like what additional questions could I potentially ask? Like I think
Mhm.
also this is another great opportunity to ask for permission and say like, hey, like I'm noticing some stuff here from a behavior change and mindset perspective. Would you be game to like unpack this a little bit more? Because I think
Mhm.
it could be really powerful. So that's also like getting their buy-in to the process because
Mhm.
sometimes what can happen is like people's clients are like, I another question, like where is this going? Like can we like stop this now? But if you present it as like I'm seeing something here,
Mhm.
we're going to dive in if you're game to do so, then they actually start to think like, oh, okay, so this is there's a calculated process here. We're like getting into something and it's not just like another question, like what's the purpose of this? What's going on? Like actually laying the value out in front of them for that, you're going to get much more higher, like a higher likelihood of them even responding in the first place and better information because you're like, this is what we're doing. You're not just like asking like a rhetorical question, which is what clients think a lot of the time. So no, I
Mhm.
really like that perspective in that direction for sure.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. That was that was validating. Another thing too, just with, behavior change in general, right? I think we all go through periods, like we just use this as example, right? Maybe we've unearthed something that it's like, whoa, this is like a big thing. Um, but then there's also times where kind of life is kind of chill, right? And it's like things are going okay. Like my relationship with food is pretty good, this and that. I actually can find almost sometimes that coaches and clients, especially clients, get a little bit antsy when that's all happening, right? Because we always think like change, growth, evolution, got to keep doing it. I'm super guilty of this, as you know. This happens and all, I mean, it's when, especially when you've gone through a period of when things are like really, really hectic in your life, and for a lot of clients, when we're talking about working through these things, it's a lot. Or let's say a client has just come off of a, competition or a really big goal. They just got married, like things like that. Now we're kind of in this lull period, or we're kind of in this just like coasting period. And then the client starts to get antsy. Well, what are we doing next? What's this? How do we kind of quell that? And is there really a need to always be striving towards like more change always better, right? Is there always these things to unearth? Or like how do we kind of get through those more coasting kind of periods?
Yeah, and I think it like this is funny, Lauren, because I feel like it is like coinciding so much with like our personal talks.
Yeah.
But
The aforementioned voice notes that are 10 to 15.
the other podcast that
The
we
other,
have together.
oh my gosh, if we could put on like voice changers, I would totally like publish all of me and my girlfriend's like audio notes.
My God, they would actually like y'all would find them very entertaining. I can tell you
They
that right now.
they would hit. And we always use code names anyway or nicknames for
This is
people, so
true.
it would
This
really
is
be
true.
fine. I just don't want people knowing that it's
Oh my God, so funny. But yes, there's definitely times where it does like, and honestly, this also I feel like parallels a lot too with just body composition change, like talking about like maintenance time versus like working to build versus working to diet and things like that. And like life is going to have those periods, whether we are talking about body composition change or we're talking about self improvement or we're talking about relationships or we're talking about whatever. Like there's going to be times where you're kind of like, oh, are we good? Like, are we good here right now? And I think that comes up a lot for especially like high achieving clients too, who are like what else can we do? What else should I be working on? I have a client who's like this, and she's like in my ear about like, how do I make sure that I'm getting enough like B vitamins for my food every day? I'm like, whoa, like that's so granular.
So niche.
So niche. I'm like, I'm so happy that you care, but also like, where's this coming from? Why? And she's like, oh, I just feel like maybe it'd be good for like my energy to like focus more on this. I'm like, yeah, for sure. But like, let's zoom out for a second. Um, and it can feel hard. It's like you want to fill the space with something. But that's
Mhm.
also, I think, like a lesson in, again, Lauren, a lesson in patience and a lesson in like wanting to, like allowing yourself to just like be and be
Yes.
present and
Mhm.
like cultivate gratitude for the how far you've come so far. Like spend some time really thinking about where you do want to go and get really clear on your like future intentions for how you're going to get there. And like it can still be like an active time, but just a little bit less like intense in that way. And like those periods are really necessary, just like they are from a body composition perspective. Like you
Mhm.
can't like constantly be dieting all the time. If you want to actually have the body composition that you're looking for, like you need to move into these other seasons, and a lot of times that looks like maintaining for a while, right? And like it really is like an analogy for like everything else in life too. Like you need to have these maintenance phases where you kind of like check in, reset, what are your intentions, how are you feeling, before we like continue to plow forward, because you also don't
Mhm.
want to be in a position where you're doing a bunch of stuff just for the sake of doing stuff either.
Yes, and I think a lot of people, especially now with just like the current landscape of like using the example of like the B vitamin thing, right? And not to say that B vitamins are not important, not to say that maybe your client doesn't need more of them or could supplement with them, all that. But I think a lot of times it's like really mentally satisfying to latch on to these ultra specific, ultra niche things that we're like, oh, I must do this now. And we all know, like, when life is lifing, it's like, okay, I can barely get enough protein and water in. But then at the same time, 3 months later, when like everything's fucking Gucci, we're like, ah, well, what about my V vitamins? And should I be doing this? And should I buy that? And
Yeah.
should I go here? And da-da? And it's like, whoa, 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 there is a happy medium here, right? And I always try to tell people, I'm like, listen, if like the best thing I can do is help you make all of this stuff in terms of like nutrition, training, habits, lifestyle, all of this like second nature, so that you can actually take this energy that you were putting here before and put it into the rest of
Mm-hmm.
your life. Like this is actually the end goal, is for us to spend less time here and for this to become habitual and truly like low energy. Like it is low energy for me to meal prep and eat certain foods and go on walks. Now, doesn't mean that I do it every week, right? There's certainly times where I'm like, fuck, I'm tired. I don't want to do this. I might skip a training session. Like, trust me, I'm not saying that I don't do these things and that's not like a barrier, but it's the whole goal is that it actually is easy. And I think that we can lose sight of that because a lot of people have gone through really hard shit when it comes to their food and their mindset around, whether it's change or their body comp or just like their body image, right? And it's always like, one thing is so common, like mirror checking and like, oh, my body image is really low this week. And listen, again, we all have weeks. Like, there are some days I wake up and I'm like, no, this is not it. There was a meme I saw and it was like it was like Jabba the Hutt and it was like body dysmorphia. Hey, by the way, you look like this today. And it's like literally there are just some days where physically and the zero has changed with my body, with my face, with anything. And I'm just like, nope, I'm horribly ugly. Nothing fits me. And then literally 2 days later, I'll be like, oh, I am killing it. Like I look banging and nothing is different.
No difference.
No, zero difference detected. But it's one of those things where it's like, yes, we can get so obsessed with things, but it's like, hey, if, you know, taking note when you have a bad day, I just keep it moving. I'm not going to keep mirror checking. I'm not going to keep looking because it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And it's not to say that I'm avoiding it, but it's like, okay, I know realistically this is not my day. So let me just move on from this, right? But I think it's so hard because we get so used to dealing with a lot of ups and downs and really hard challenges that when things are kind of easy, we're like, should I make them harder? Like, should I blow this
Yes.
up? And this goes for not just nutrition and training, y'all. Obviously, anybody listening who's dealt with their own kind of like personal work will be like, oh, yeah, I totally get that. I know I am very guilty of that
Let's
because
shake it up.
oh yeah, let's just like totally fucking ruin this. Because it's just you're just so used to chaos, and this happens a lot. Of
Hmm.
course, if anybody's had anything traumatic happen to them, and not even anything like capital T trauma, like you can just have
Hmm.
certain things happen to you. It could also just be a personality trait. There's some people who like more intense things than others, right?
Hmm.
Like that's
Right.
pretty obvious, right? Like there's some people who really have like a proclivity towards that. Other people are like, nah, I'm just kind of chilling
Yeah, all
all
those
the time.
Leos.
Yeah. I'm like, I cannot relate on any aspect of being just chill and not caring about things. There's certain things I don't care at all about. Like, I don't, if I'm on a trip, I'm not planning anything. No, you know that I'm just like, whatever.
Yep, just whatever you want to do.
But then, like, going back to school, I'm like, okay, what are the courses? When are they going to be offered? What time of day? Like, I'm literally like psycho in certain details, could not care less about other things.
That's so funny.
And I think our
Yeah.
clients obviously are dealing with that because they're coming to us with those situations to us. So we're getting the
Mhm.
most intense version of them because that's what they care most about right now.
Yeah, and I like a lot what you said about just like it gets to be easier over time, and like that's the goal.
That's the
Like
goal.
that's the goal. The goal is for it to feel more like this is just what I do. It doesn't require a ton of like effort and like games with myself to try to like all of like the streaks and the extrinsic motivators. Like I don't
Yeah.
need that because it's just part of my life. It's just part
Hmm.
of who I am. And like
Hmm.
that's the goal. So if you find yourself getting to a place where you're kind of like, oh, I'm just like making it to the gym 4 to 5 times a week and I'm hitting my macros like 90%
Hmm.
of the time. I'm getting water, I'm sleeping, like should I be doing more? Should I be doing more? It's like no, like this you're congratulations. You made it, right? Like
Yeah.
you can
You
like this is
did
where
it.
like for sure, like this is the time where you do get to maybe like dabble in some more like advanced methods and get a little bit
Hmm.
more specific on things and like biohacking, what have yous. People are like very quick to like want to focus on those things when they're not doing the basics and they don't have like a
Yes.
healthy lifestyle.
A lifey. I'm
A
definitely
life
using that now.
it's not even like good.
What a great lifey.
My God. Yeah, you don't even have that foundation, but yet you're trying to do all these other things. Like that's where you get to start to play in that space for sure. But just like this is check yourself and make sure it's not
Hmm.
coming from a place of like, oh, like I need to make this harder on
Hmm.
myself because now it feels easier. But instead you're seeing like, oh, now that I've made this easier, how can I like make some optimization tweaks,
Yeah.
rather than seeing it as like, yeah, how do I shake shit up?
Hmm. But alternatively, as you were saying that, so oftentimes we have to really struggle to, not struggle in a negative way, but we have to work really hard to get past, a lot of this friction, create this change our mindset, and we get to the end goal, yay, is to be just kind of just chilling. And we're in maintenance mode. Now, of course, if you have certain goals, like you said, we can dabble. If you want to change your goals, yes. But there's also kind of a time where we can find that we're sliding out of maintenance, right? And maybe, yeah, I was going 4 to 5 times a week, and now it's like, yeah, I'm kind of going 3 times. And if I skip a workout, it's fine. And, I'm not really as going as intense. And yeah, I ate out like way more this week, right? Like at some point we can sometimes slide out of our good behaviors too by being a little bit too lenient, right?
Hmm.
And again, everybody has different seasons, so maybe that season that's necessary, but there's also a time where we have to call ourselves and we have to say, hey, I've just not been on top of myself, not been on top of, it's not my standard, and there's plenty of room and time for me to do that. I've just been kind of getting a little bit lazy. So if someone
Hmm.
has done all the things, they've made it, they're not a beginner, right? But now maybe they've kind of fallen off a little bit. What are some ways that we can, get over that friction to get back? Because sometimes there's also that like level of guilt. I know I've dealt with that because there's,
Hmm.
literally training and looking a certain way was a huge part of my life for so long. And then it's like, oh my God, who am I to fall out of this? This is literally what I do for a living and tell people to do.
Yeah.
This is embarrassing. I should be ashamed of myself, kind of a thing. So how do we, part of it is a guilt thing, but part of it is also just getting back into that. So what are
Hmm.
some strategies there that, both the clients and coaches could maybe implement?
Yeah, that's a tough one too, because like you said, it's not like you're struggling to implement something. It's like, okay, you've implemented it, it's felt more habitual, it's kind of become part of who you are, it's embedded in
Hmm.
your identity. So then when you do have, you become a normal human being again, and you like, oh, I'm not gonna train today because I am tired, even though I used to remember when I would like push myself at five o'clock in the morning and still go, even though I was up until 2, like studying, and like because I had to
Uh,
get it done. I
that
had
was
to do
that was
it.
too personal. That was
We are
college.
similar. Yeah, right. We are similar in a lot of ways. Lord.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's tough. And now it's like you're like thinking to yourself, like, how was I doing that? And now I'm just like, you want me to go to the gym at 6 p.m.? Like, no, or
No.
like 6 a.m. Like either one, I'm like, no, like I work out in the middle of the day, otherwise it's not happening. Like, yes, like it's tough to deal with that because we're also like we're talking like identity crisis here, like this is entirely different animal. You're like rubbing up against like, is this me? Is it not me? This is who I used to be. I used to be like so much like more motivated. I used to be so much like more hard, like I could figure this out. And now I'm just like, I'm being more lenient. And I think it's important to ask yourself, like, is that a bad thing? Is there something wrong with that? Like, and also, who is the person you want to be then? If you feel like you're moving away from who that other person was. And like, truth be told, right? Like, we don't need to be like forcing ourselves to go to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning if we were up until 1 o'clock in the morning doing like other things. And that's okay. So like for me, I think about that and I'm like, yeah, well, if I end up like skipping a day here or there, or like during HMCC launches, like
Mhm.
chances of me getting to the gym are usually pretty slim. I try to get out for some walks. If I can get to the gym, awesome. But a lot of times it's just like, this is what's more important for this week. Whereas in a past life, it would be like, nope, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to run myself into the ground type of thing. And the reality is like the healthier, better version of me is one who is more lenient. And you need to essentially come to terms with like what is the best version and what does
Mhm.
that look like for you, and everyone's version is going to look different. And if that looks different than like who you used to be, just know like you're an ever evolving person. Like you evolved into that past self from a previous self too. So like you're constantly evolving and constantly changing. And you'll have those seasons where it feels a little bit more like, well, like who am I anymore type of thing. Whereas other times you're just like you're so in it that you're not having those situations. So anyway, I feel like I'm like talking in circles at this point. So
No, I mean, it's an open-ended question, but I think you nailed it. And it really just comes back to, okay, maybe you had a previous identity and maybe you're not living up to that and you need to get back to that. Or maybe the
mhm,
previous identity is no longer serving that. And
right.
either direction, you just have to make that decision and move forward. And
Hmm.
this is where sometimes it is nice to have the counsel of, a coach or a trainer or someone in your life who is objective, right? Because sometimes we can either be too hard on ourselves or too lenient on ourselves. And that's where having that, second set of eyes to be like, hey, these were the goals that we talked about. I want to make sure that we're still on that track. If the goals have changed, that's also cool. Like let's update
Hmm.
what we're working towards. And there's sometimes where people just either direction are like, oh man, you're right. Like I do need to do this, or you know what, it's okay that I didn't do that. And let's update, kind of who am I moving forward. And I think
Hmm.
that's a tough one, especially anyone who I'm sure either a student or an athlete or a student athlete. um, I know that that was a huge struggle for me once I finished grad school, and then as I was finishing grad school, I then competed at the end of that season, and then I got really hurt, and then I pretty much like could barely train. So I'm like, I'm barely training. I've, gained weight post competition. I'm not in school anymore. I'm like, who am I? Like it
Who
was
am
like
I?
really the first case of like, struggling to get out of bed, like those kinds of things, you know, and it
Mhm.
was really hard for a while to, and I didn't have the tools that I have now to understand kind of what was going on, but it really did seem like, what is this identity? And that's now ever evolving, and I'm much more open to constantly evolving and being in a good flow with myself. But that took a lot of years for me to become more intuitive, because a lot of us are just like, I do this, I act this way. This is what I
Mhm.
said, this is what I'll do. And like, yes, you have to, when you say you're going to do something, do it. Otherwise, your self-confidence is really going to be in the shitter. But you also then, once you're done with it, go like, is this what I want to be doing anymore? You know, talking about like, you know, staying up late, like, you know, finals week, always notorious, like pulling all-nighters. And then guess where I was? Zero sleep, right at the gym, you know,
Yep.
5 a.m., 6 a.m., and then, oh, gotta go back to the library, gotta go take my
Mhm.
test. And I was just like a machine for all those
Yep.
years. And it's like, to expect my 31, almost 32-year-old brain and body to do that is a hard no.
Mhm.
I think I used up a lot of my resources back then. I
They're
think
not coming back. They're left there.
they're in Florida State. They are definitely living in Tallahassee. Those brain cells are still there. um, but like, and again, it's like, I don't need to be that person anymore, you know, like, and that's okay. And
Mhm.
now, you know, my life is probably going to change in the next few months, and I'm going to have to re-update, you know, kind of, how do I work? How do I live? What's important? And it's just constantly evolving. And that goes for, to round out this conversation, that goes for all behavior change. Again, whether you're, you know, the client who's listening, who is, you know, trying to update your goals, and if you're the coach listening who's trying to update how you view
Mhm.
change with your client, and being less dogmatic with that. So I really appreciate all of your insights. It was so great as always. I love our talks. We do have to make it an annual, if not more.
Yes.
And speaking of HMCC, let's give a few details on launch day and kind of what people can expect there. And we will definitely put all the information in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm super excited. This is our, I think, eighth or ninth round of the health mindset coaching certification. So yeah, since 2020 was when the first round, the inaugural, I can never say this word. Remember, I couldn't say it at our event either. Inaugural. See, you can't do it either.
Inaugural. Oh, that sounds all
Inaugural.
inaugural. It
See,
sounds
that
like
sounds wrong.
like Larry the Cable Guy. Okay. Okay.
Anyway,
That
the
thing.
first round, the very first round was in 2020. But yes, the spring 2024 cohort will start enrollment on March 18th and it closes down on the 21st. So it's kind of like a 4-day window where you can get in and then we'll close it back down. I do this because it is, I say it's self-paced, but instructor led. So in that way, we have never had lower than I think like a 92% success rate. So like successful completion like of students the entire time. And we're getting close to 600 students who have been certified. And I have the structure set up for that reason. So the reason I really do think it is so successful is because of this. And how we have it set up is every single week, you'll have a module that's pre-recorded from me. We're talking the science of self control, the science of stress, like habit formation, motivation, goal setting, mindset, of course, communication strategies, all of that good stuff. And it's pre recorded. So you're kind of doing it on your own every single week. So you can watch 15 minutes here on a Monday, 10 minutes here on a Tuesday. You can rewind, you can restart, however you want, however is best for you to learn. And then once a week, you'll join me in a live call. Well, we'll do a discussion essentially on that content and on application strategies with that content, and as well as just like any general client cases that you need help with. Like I'm there with you every step of the way. So it's a good kind of combination. We get a lot of good feedback on like how this course is actually structured is very helpful for everyone's learning style. There's also a final assessment at the end where you actually do a client case study so you can actually truly apply a lot of the science to your clients, and then you get feedback from us too. So it's very, very personalized feedback. It's not like a multiple choice or anything like that. So this is very much my bread and butter program. It is me taking what I know from my PhD and from research land and also coaching land and kind of putting it together for you as a coach so you can really leverage the science for your clients.
Oh yeah, well, I love it so much. Obviously, I love you. I love the course. I love this topic. So, If you guys are interested, like I said, we will put that in the show notes and anywhere else that people can find you, reach out. And I know during launch week you do calls and stuff, right? So if someone is like, hey, I still have more questions, hence why she's not
Mhm.
going to the gym, you guys, because she's talking to everybody. How does that process work? Like if someone is interested but they want more information, what are the next steps there?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to just go to the website. So it's healthmindsetcert.com. And so you can get a lot of information right off the bat when it comes to like the curriculum, the structure, FAQs, things like that. I also have a wait list. So if you're listening to this right away before March 18th, you can get on the wait list. And so you'll be the first ones to hear more information, discounts, bonuses, all that good stuff too. And when you're on the wait list, you also get 5 free lessons from me. So if you're like, hey, this is something I want to do in the future, like it's not in the cards for me in the next few weeks, like maybe in the fall, maybe 2025. If you're on the wait list, you'll still be first to hear about enrollment and you'll get those 5 free lessons right away. So that's where I would head to first.
Absolutely. And yes, the website is chock full of information. So I am super excited for the not first launch, the maybe eighth or ninth
Yeah,
cohort.
right.
And if anybody wants to follow you, if they're not already, what is the best place to do so?
Yeah, so I'm Coach Kasey Joe on pretty much all platforms. I mostly am only on Instagram. If you see me
I
on
was like,
TikTok,
what
it's
other platforms?
yeah, you can find me on TikTok. You can find me on YouTube. It's not as fruitful as it is on Instagram. So mostly I would just go to Instagram if I were
Okay,
you.
yeah, we'll just go to Instagram for that one. So we'll put that below as well. So thank you guys as always for tuning in. And Kasey is such an amazing resource. So definitely go follow her, get on the wait list for HMCC. And thank you guys as always for tuning in. And we will talk to you next week.